working with a network of nearly 400 municipalities across Europe through a zero waste cities program. We also support our members in 28 countries, local and national NGOs working on zero waste. And we are based in Brussels to push for ambitious legislation. And also through the work with our members, we support the ground implementation of zero waste strategies. Today, our topic is waste trade and the impacts of waste that is generated in Europe. It continues to be felt in countries and communities across the world. We see communities that have to deal with the effect of waste trade from Europe, and we see sometimes waste that is dumped or burned, and there is a need to change at the European level, while at the same time, we need to find a way to include waste trade into circular economy, but also to look at the upstream solutions regarding waste trade and waste in general. 2020 and 2021 were extremely important years in the fight to tackle the waste trade crisis. We have seen the Basel Convention's plastic amendments entering into force. They entered into force on the 1st of January 2021. And this webinar will go further and examine the current policies and landscape about what is being done at the European and the global level to tackle this waste trade crisis. We are also organizing this webinar in the light of the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan that has a specific provision on waste trade, and it wants to ensure that the EU does not export its waste challenges to third countries. And we know that the European Commission, through the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan mandate, is preparing a revision of the waste shipment regulation. So through this webinar, we will go into greater depth to answer some key questions around waste shipment. What are the latest developments regarding EU law on waste shipment? What have been the consequences of waste shipment, both in Europe and abroad? If we were to have a ban or strong restriction on waste shipment, where would it apply? How would it be implemented? And also, if we stop exporting waste outside of the European Union, what should we do for what remains within the European Union? And what other measures should we have to complement the waste trade issue from a circular economy perspective? And also, we will look at the solution and the way forward to solve this issue and to make it happen within a circular economy framework, and also who are the key stakeholders and who can act regarding this. So today we have 4 speakers, and each speaker will present for around 8 minutes. After every presentation, we will have a 5 minutes Q&A session for any clarification. And at the end of 1 hour of presentations and questions to speakers, we will also have a joint Q&A session of half an hour, 30 minutes, to have a discussion with all the speakers. Regarding this webinar, we know the topic is quite timely, and so we had around 300 registrants, but unfortunately, Zoom only allows 100 seats in the webinar. But we are also broadcasting the webinar live on YouTube, so you can also, if you cannot access, you can also see it on YouTube. If you have questions and you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A box. There is a specific Q&A box for questions on Zoom. And I will be receiving the questions either from the Q&A box specifically or from my colleagues, and then I will pass it on to the speakers. Same if you are on YouTube, you can put your questions in the chat, and I will receive the questions from the chat and pass it on to the speakers. In the meantime, there is a specific chat box, both on Zoom and YouTube, and you can use it to introduce yourself, to share specific documents, data that you have, or to discuss with other speakers. And that's it from me. Without further delays, I will start this exciting discussion with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Mageswari Sangaralingam, and she's a research officer of the Consumers Association of Penang and the honorary secretary of Sahabat Alam Malaysia, Friends of the Earth Malaysia. She has extensive experience in assisting communities affected by poor policies, destructive development projects, and pollution, and she advocates for sustainable alternatives to current policies. And also she's based in Malaysia, so I want to thank her for being here right now when it's a bit later than it is here in Brussels. So yeah, thanks Mageswari, and you can now share your presentation as it's already done, and I will leave the floor to you.
Good day, everyone. I'm Mageswari. I work with the Consumers Association of Penang and also Friends of the Earth Malaysia. So today I'll be sharing with you impacts of waste trade on Malaysia, and also it's kind of similar with other developing countries. I'll be sharing waste data from how much of waste was and where did the waste from Europe go to in the last 2 years, and also the impacts that we have been facing in Malaysia, and what do we want here. Okay, so where did the waste from EU go to? If you look at the data, most of the waste from 2016 to 2018, most of the waste went to China. So when China closed their doors and they were not importing any more waste, plastic waste, the waste stream actually moved to Malaysia and also other developing countries. You can see to Thailand, Indonesia, and India. And lately, most of the waste has been going to Turkey. So if you look at the other side here, until 2020, you can see that the waste to Malaysia, it had actually peaked in 2018, yeah, right after China closed its doors, and then it dropped a little in July and August 2018 because Malaysia found that there's a lot of waste being dumped in our country, and so the government took strict enforcement action and also had a moratorium on the waste imports. Yeah, and then later on the waste import, and they actually announced that there will be a ban on imports of plastic waste. But what it's not exactly a ban, but what happened was they will be issuing approved permits to the exporters and also importers to bring in the waste to Malaysia. And there were some conditions also that the importers and exporters have to fulfill. Yeah, so they're required to fulfill. So what were the impacts? So what we found was that the type of waste that was coming in, the plastic waste, it was also mixed waste. Some were contaminated, some were low value, low grade plastics, yeah, which you cannot recycle. Even if you can recycle, it will cost a lot. And also in terms of the contaminated waste or dirty waste, what we have to do is we have to wash the waste, yeah, and also so that is actually polluting our waterways. And what happened to the waste that cannot be recycled, it actually ended up in dump sites. So if you can see the picture here, it is an illegal dump site. They just threw away all the residual waste. And what we found was after China closed its doors in 2018, some of the Chinese investors came to Malaysia and opened up illegal factories. So what happened? The illegal factories, they were only taking in waste which they can recycle, yeah, lucratively, and whatever which they don't need, they just dump. If it's a proper recycler, they cannot do that because they have to follow certain restrictions and also guidelines and standards of our Department of Environment. Okay, so the waste that were dumped, we found that it was polluting our soil, it was getting into our water systems, and then after it's like it degrades and also have microplastics. Yeah, and also some of the waste were being burnt. Yeah, the ones that you see in the picture here, they were being burnt. It could be arson or it's like flammable and it gets burnt. And this threatens public health. Yeah, the communities were faced, who was around the recycling sites and also the dump sites which got burnt, they were facing problems, health problems. Yeah, and also it also affects the workers. And most of the workers that we find there are also foreign workers. Yeah, some have proper permits or some do not have the permits, and so they were also affected. And when it comes to cleaning up, when the government takes actions to stop this illegal factories and all that, who pays for the cleanup? Yeah, it's not the importers or the exporters and also the illegal recyclers, because the government could not find them. So what happened is that we, the taxpayers, had to clean up, yeah, the waste. Yeah. So Greenpeace Malaysia had done a study on the to check on the contamination. Yeah, they found that there was significant contamination with hazardous chemicals, including heavy metals, and also the presence of brominated flame retardants. Yeah, so these were found in the plastics. And there is also evidence of contamination of our waterways. Yeah, and what we find that the Malaysian government was also becoming very strict. They said, we are not going to be a dumping ground. So they repatriated waste. Lately, right now, what we have the figures is 200 containers of waste has been returned. This was a news, Euronews.com. So we found that 150 containers were returned to France, UK, some to US, Canada, Spain. And also lately in June 2020, it was reported that some of the waste was like 7 containers were sent to Belgium, Germany, Poland. Yeah. And also there was a few containers from Portugal and Lithuania. What we find is that you can see that the details says that the rest were sent to Hong Kong, because some of these waste containers were transshipped. Yeah, from Europe it may have gone to Hong Kong and then changed the bill of ladings and then come to Malaysia. So a lot of it is also illegal. Yeah, the declaration in the bills of lading is a false declaration. So this was found by our customs. Okay, the emerging issue now is also when the government is getting strict with this plastic waste imports, and yeah, so what we are finding is we are talking about waste trade. We are also finding paper recycling plants have come up. These are also a lot of investors are from China, and the paper recycling plants come in together with thermal treatment plants, yeah, incinerators to burn the residual waste. And if you can see the waste acceptance criteria, there is also a lot of residual waste which will be produced. And if we find that in Indonesia, what they found, the paper waste that came in was mixed with plastic waste. So this could be another ploy where they say they are sending paper waste, but it is mixed with plastic waste. Another issue is also illegal e-waste. So Malaysia is party to the Basel Ban amendments, and there is, so under the Basel Convention, Malaysia can or cannot accept any electronic waste, electrical and electronic waste. Yeah. So what we found that, and lately the Department of Environment also announced that a lot of illegal e-waste has been coming into Malaysia, and that also has been repatriated. And we ourselves had monitored and tracked waste from US. Yeah, the recyclers in US had put in trackers, and we found that some of the waste came to Malaysia, and we are not supposed to. And we have also alerted the Department of Environment. So if you can see, what they do is they remove whatever they need from the electronic waste, and whatever residuals are just dumped. Yeah, so these are the residuals that you can see. And these are also some plastic components, which is shredded. Okay, so what we want is actually a ban of ban the export of plastic waste outside of the EU. So since we're talking to the European friends from the European Union now, so we want a ban on exports of plastic waste, because whatever it is, we see that if there is still ongoing exports from EU, who is checking, yeah, what exactly is coming in? Malaysia has strict conditions that the waste that is coming in must be free from contamination. It has to be sorted. It has to be homogeneous, yeah, and also destined for environmentally sound recycling. So probably the importer is bringing in the waste, but then they could be also selling it to some other recyclers, illegal recyclers. So we would not know. So what we need is monitoring and enforcement measures to tackle illegal waste trade. And there was recently Interpol report that organized crime is involved in terms of the exports of waste trade. Yeah. So, and what we would like EU, our friends in the European Union to do is also to recycle domestically. Yeah, but we find that recycling is not the answer. We also need to prioritize source reduction. It's also so end single-use products and whatever single-use plastics which are not essential has to be banned. So this, we are also working in Malaysia on this. The Malaysian government had come up with a roadmap to eliminate single-use plastics until 2030. So we would hope that all over the world we would have to reduce plastic pollution by also prioritizing source reduction. So thank you. Muted.
Yes, I can't believe this still happens. But thanks, Maitwani, for this very interesting presentation. So far, there are no questions, and because this is a virtual meeting, we're of course already late, and so I will pass it on directly to the next speaker. But I want to remind you that there is a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so maybe you're waiting to have more views to ask your questions, but don't be shy, use the box. Our next speaker is Sirin Rachid. She works as a global policy advocate for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, and that is called Gaia. Sirin supports robust regional and global policies and standards that combat plastics-related harms and pave the way for just, local, and a toxic-free zero-waste economy. So thanks a lot, Sirin, for being here. And I will share your presentation. And let's see if it works. It should work. And just let me know whenever you want to change slides.
Thank you, Pierre. You can start with the first slide. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. So I work for Gaia, which is a network of 800 groups in 90 countries, working on preventing waste in a way that enhances social justice and protects the environment. So what's the relationship between what we do and the waste trade? In a way, what we do is the opposite of the way the plastic waste trade has been operating up to date. So we build capacity for sustainable local waste management, while in contrast, some recycling industries have really been very dependent on the global plastic waste market. And so they've been sourcing recyclable materials from the other side of the world while neglecting waste produced in their own communities. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to focus on the global context of plastic waste trade regulations and try to point out some strengths and limitations so that we can open some perspectives on what the EU should perhaps consider in reforming its own regulations. So as Pierre mentioned, on the 1st of January, amendments to the Basel Convention entered into force. These introduced controls on the international trade of several kinds of plastic wastes. All plastic wastes that are not destined for environmentally sound recycling in the importing country. All of those that are composite materials, for example, your bag of crisps, which is an aluminum plastic laminate. All dirty and unsorted plastic wastes, except for one specific mix of polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET, and the overwhelming majority of halogenated plastic wastes. And so these controls consist in a requirement for exporters to obtain prior consent from importing countries before any trade takes place. And plastic waste that are hazardous, it's good to point out, were already controlled under the convention and now are subject to the ban amendment, which means countries of the OECD cannot export hazardous plastics to non-OECD countries. And as my guest pointed out, the context for these changes is China refusing to be the top destination for international plastic waste exports in 2018. Some operators, some recyclers, then moving from China to neighboring Asian countries to continue their recycling operations that were often substandard. And so as those Asian countries, including Malaysia, started to experience the environmental harm resulting from these operations, they also started to restrict imports. Next slide, please. So I think there's three key strengths there from those amendments. The first one is that obviously governments on the receiving end of the global plastic waste trade have regained some sovereignty by having the opportunity to refuse shipments which are most likely to cause toxic and climate pollution, right? So these mixed and dirty plastic waste, they have the chance now to refuse those shipments. On the other hand, exporters of recyclable waste have a clear incentive now to improve sorting, reduce contamination in order to avoid the new controls where possible. And obviously, that's not just the recycler exports, that's also the whole waste management system upstream, thinking from the moment of waste collection all the way to the moment of export. And the third advantage is that countries whose waste sector up to this point has been heavily reliant on exports now have the opportunity to consider how to better prevent plastic waste in the first place and increase domestic recycling capacity, something that Mages has also referred to. But despite these strengths, we do see a lot of challenges still, and I'm going to go into a few of those. Next slide, please. So you might have heard in the news that Turkey is one of the emerging destinations after China closed its doors and after Asian countries sort of suffered the consequences and started also closing their doors to international plastic waste. But despite this fact, Turkey decided not to implement the new Basel Convention controls for the time being. And last year, they did pass some domestic policies, reducing the volume of plastic waste that can be imported, depending on importers' capacity to process plastic waste. And also very recently, apparently banning or reportedly banning shipments of mixed plastic waste, even though that's not very clearly defined in the regulation, but still evidence on the ground is showing continuing mismanagement of imported plastic waste. One thing I'd like to show you a short clip from a Greenpeace investigation in Turkey that shows some of the impacts of those imports. Hopefully it works. So this illustrates some of the things Mages was talking about in Malaysia as well.
Yabancı kişiler plastik getiriyorlar, atık plastik. Yakıyorlar, zit gibi çıkıyor. Bu da simsiyah duman çıkarıyor.
Geçen gün hayvanlarımı yol kenarından götürürken hayvanımın biri bak rahatsızlandı. O sarı bir tozlar var orada. O sarı tozdan bir iki ağız aldı yetişene kadar ben. Hayvanım zehirlenmiş durumda bakın. Şu hayvanım o tozdan zehirlendi. İğne ilaçla veteriner çağırdım ve zor ayakta tuttum. Bak hayvanımın halini görüyorsun işte. 3. gündür boynunu bükmüş hala toparlamaya çalışıyor. Yazık günah yani. Biz burada dumanından, isinden rahatsız oluyoruz ya.
Burada milletin sağlığına oynanıyor. Mahsule zarar veriyor. Dumanı mahsule zarar veriyor.
Akyatan Tuzlala günlerine, yani Türkiye'nin en önemli sulak alanlarından birine kadar uzanan bir kanalın kenarında terk edilmiş, atılmış, zaman zaman da yakılan plastik çöplerin olduğu bir alandayız. Bunların büyük çoğunluğunun üzerinde geri dönüştürülebilir ibaresi olmasına rağmen bu plastiklerin hepsi yol kenarına, dere kenarına bir şekilde terk edilmiş. Bunların bir kısmı da yakılmış. Bu yakılma esnasında çok ciddi, toksik, zehirli gazlar ortaya çıkıyor. Ciddi anlamda kanserojen maddeler ve bunlara maruz kalındığında birçok sağlık problemi ortaya çıkabiliyor.
Dün akşamleyin yine itfaiye geldi. Yakıyorlar, bir kapkara duman, sanki kapkara bulut oluşuyor.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So what this, oops, sorry, I'm not sure why the sound is.
Plastik getiriyorlar, atık plastik. Yakıyorlar, zit gibi çıkıyor. Bu da simsiyah duman çıkarıyor.
Hayvanımın biri bak rahatsızlandı. O sarı bir tozlar var orada. O sarı tozdan bir iki ağız aldı yetişene kadar.
I'm not sure if it's coming from my side or...
Yeah, it comes from your side.
İlaçla veteriner çağırdım ve zor ayakta tuttum. Bak hayvanın halini görüyorsun işte.
Lovely. Apologies for that.
No worries.
So what this video really showed is that, so I'm going to go in full screen here and follow the slides are showing. What this video really shows there is that even though a lot of these imported plastic waste are being imported for recycling, and some recycling may take place, there's still toxic impacts. And what's really concerning at the international level is we don't have any guarantees, we don't have any strict definition of what environmentally sound recycling is. And actually, as I mentioned, Turkey has not accepted the new Basel Convention plastic waste amendments, but even countries that have accepted these and are importing plastics for recycling, there's no controls on what environmentally sound recycling means. And the picture you can see in this slide is from a recent investigation into plastic imports to Ecuador from the United States. They're mostly polyethylene plastics from the agricultural sector from Mississippi. And so it turns out that during the last 6 years, this importer called Productos Paraíso has been pouring wastewater into a local stream that ends up in the Pacific Ocean that is black with chemicals and also full of microplastics. So there are emissions that can arise from recycling operations that should be controlled and that should be relevant to what is environmentally sound recycling. And as you've seen in the Turkey video, the second aspect that is important for recycling is how the residues are managed, right? So when a shipment of plastic waste comes in, the good stuff in between inverted commas gets taken out, gets recycled. What happens to all the contaminants? What happens to the plastic bags, the films? What happens to the contaminants that are not good enough, too dirty, or the wrong type of plastic to be recycled? And often those end up open burnt, those end up dumped in the environment. And so any definition of environmentally sound recycling should really look at how residues are managed. And because we don't have a way to control that at the moment, that's why we're really insisting on the idea of having good contamination limits, right? The cleaner a shipment is coming in, the more really recyclable plastics there are in that shipment, the smaller the volume of the leftovers of the residues, and the smaller the risk that they'll be mismanaged. Next slide, please. This is a really handy diagram developed by our colleagues at IPEN. IPEN is an international organization that has done groundbreaking investigations on how waste results in toxic pollution that affects human health. And so they have done some biomonitoring studies using free-range chicken eggs to show how the plastics that are produced in global north countries that are exported to global south countries, then open burnt, the residues are open burnt and scattered in the environment. And when this open burning process happens, toxic emissions then concentrate into the ground, then into the chicken, into the eggs eaten by the local community. And so they've measured the eggs and they've found, some of basically they've sadly broken world records in dioxin and furan measurements through this method. And at the link that's there in the slide, we'll also put it in the chat. You can find all their investigations. They've done these kinds of investigations in different countries, in different continents. Next slide, please. So finally, the last limitation I'm going to touch on today is the fact that the Basel Convention allows some countries to say, okay, we're going to derogate from your rules if we can provide equivalent environmental protection. That's what's called Article 11, in reference to Article 11 of the Basel Convention. So as Gaël will explain, the EU's approach has been to implement the convention fully for trade leaving the European Union, but also having lighter controls for trade within the Union on the ground that the argument presented is, Europe is capable of managing these wastes in a way that provides equivalent protection. So without even going into that question, is it the case or not? If we agree it's the case for the sake of argument, we can see a worrying trend here, which is other countries have seen that as a signal that they can also, derogate from the rules with their own agreements. So Canada and US signed an agreement recently among themselves for plastic waste trade, which is very far from what the EU has. allows trade as usual of plastic waste between the two countries. So Canada would not be respecting its commitments under the Basel Convention to control their imports. And it's very far from Basel, the US-Canada agreement. There's no, for example, condition that uncontrolled trade is only trade that's going to recycling. And we fear there's going to be a lot of plastic waste burning as a result of that agreement. Another example is Japan. Japan has decided, citing the OECD on what we believe is a flawed legal basis, they've announced that they will not control PVC waste movements within the OECD. And next slide, please. If you want to know why that legal argument is flawed, our colleagues at the Center for International Environmental Law have just put out a legal opinion interpreting this and why the Basel Amendment rules should prevail for all parties. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for your attention.
Stop sharing. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot, Søren, for your presentation. Once again, there are no questions directly linked to your presentation, and just to remain on track and to have maybe more questions for the whole speakers at the end of the session, I will move on directly to the next speaker. The next speaker is Emmanuel Katrakis. He serves as the Secretary General of the European Recycling Industry Confederation, that is called EURIC, and he has been active since September 2014. He is responsible for the continuous development of the Confederation, which today represents, through the member federations, more than 5,500 recycling businesses across Europe. Those businesses operate on different waste streams: household, commercial, and industrial waste, but also electronic waste, end-of-life bicycles, tires, textile, and so on. One of his work is to raise awareness about the instrumental role that is played by recycling in sustainable development, but also to encourage and promote development of policies that are friendly to recycling. He is a regular speaker in international conferences dealing with recycling and a member of different expert groups set up by the European Commission that aim to support the transition towards a more circular economy. And finally, Emmanuel graduated as in the European law from the College of Europe and the University of Paris 2, Panthéon-Assas. So thanks a lot, Emmanuel, for being here today and representing the view of the recycling industry vis-a-vis this very trendy topic. So I will leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much, and also for that extensive presentation. I would like really to thank both Mageswari and Cyrine for being a constant eye-opener about actually what should not be happening, regardless of which interest we represent, whether it's an industry, whether it's acting as citizens, or whether it's working for NGOs. I think really the way we are managing waste in Europe and globally is also a reflection of society at large, and trying to improve the situation is equally important, both in terms of environmental protection and sustainable development. I'm going to go very quickly about who we represent, but I know time is scarce. So we are a confederation representing federation and companies all over Europe. We are structured in branches, so we represented the different resource streams: metals, paper, plastics, and plastics today is obviously at the core of the discussion, but also other streams. And what also basically has been highlighted both by Cyrine and Mageswari is that certain streams require a bigger scrutiny than others because actually of the environmental impacts they may actually bring. If we take a step back, I always like to show with basically start with those slides to just explain that the circular economy is a local, European, and global endeavor. It's actually a must. We, as as a planet are going to have a middle class which fortunately is going to increase in the coming years, and decoupling actually the growth, that growth from resource use is absolutely essential. Well, circular economy is a must. It's resource efficient, it's climate efficient. I took here the example of how much 1 million tons of recycling of plastic bottles equals in terms of CO2 savings. The numbers come from an LCA done by an environmental protection agency here based in Europe. But also what I think is more important is to show that if we want to reach and to move towards a more circular economy, and we are far from being there today, we really need to act all over all basically the steps of the value chains from design to end of life phase in Europe and beyond. I think it's also very useful actually to show that I didn't check the metric to be frank, but every year there is that report, the Circularity Gap report. The 2021 edition was just released, I think, a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it basically shows that we are not making progress. Actually, we are even stagnating in terms of how much circular we are going. Again, to be very frank with all the audience, I didn't go through the metrics that have been used, but I think such reports are giving a very useful trends of where we are sitting towards progressing or not progressing towards more circularity. Also, I think, and that's what I wanted to, again, take a step back before going into the waste trade crisis, which is today's basically topic. The waste trade crisis is only a consequence, I would say, of how basically we design, place on the market products and treat them when they reach end of life. And if we are not tackling everything at the same time, we are going basically to displace the problems over and over again. For me, and I think for many other organizations, whether they represent industries or NGOs, product design is really the mother of all battles. Be it in terms of designing products that are going to last longer, that are going to be easier to repair, easier to reuse, and easier to recycle when they reach end of life. Cyrine took examples of different types of plastics which are hard to recycle. I think we have, and together with other associations, the chance right now to improve actually the design of products that we place on the market. And point number 2, also price the impacts of what is being placed on the market, be it in terms of positive or negative externalities. One of the biggest problems, and that's the case especially with plastics, is that all the CO2 and resource savings that come from, for instance, recycling end-of-life products are simply not priced in in the products that are being placed on the market today. And I think especially with the COVID crisis, where we had indeed a collapse of oil prices for a year, what we saw actually is that virgin polymers became extremely cheap, and all the work that plastic recyclers and also downstream value chains have been doing to move towards more circularity basically have been greatly challenged, because it was much cheaper to buy virgin polymers, often not sourced from intra-EU sources, than to go for recycling and use actually recycled plastics back into products. And the other thing that we saw is that the targets that have been set within the Single-Use Plastics Directive that looks at one hand to ban actually single-use plastics item, on the other hand, make sure that we're going to increase the recoverability and the use of recycled content of certain plastics, and especially here PET, has a massive impact, because for the first time we saw, especially for recycled PET for food grade applications that fall under the scope of recycled content obligations, that there has been a direct decorrelation between, on one hand, the oil prices and the virgin polymer prices and the price of recycled plastics. That also means that that gives value actually to a material, and that actually also encourages its use at the end of life stage, and hence has also an impact on basically making sure that they are going to be recovered when they reach end of life in Europe and serve new material cycles. I think one thing that we all also agree is the need to have well-functioning markets. And this is where I would, I think, have a kind of dissenting opinion with what Cyrine especially has been mentioning for intra-EU shipment and the derogation. We need actually to have in Europe much easier way to ship for material recovery purposes, plastic waste in particular from countries A to country B, to high quality facilities which are going to recover different types of polymers. And I think that's really important because to reach an economies of scales, we need actually to have an internal market. That's what happened with goods 50 years ago with internal market, and that's actually what needs to happen today if we want to have circular value chains in Europe. I took that as an example because I saw after the SUP that a lot of brands here, I deleted the name of the brand, but a lot of brands today are going much beyond actually what Europe has set a targets, which actually should be welcome, strongly welcome, which also shows that when there is actually an impulse, usually the market follows. Moving a bit away from plastics to go to paper, and again, not willing to make any comparison between both, except making the case for well-functioning internal market for recovery purposes. What our members are telling us is that still today, it's increasingly difficult to ship basically materials classified as waste from one EU country to another because of the lack of harmonization across member states. And I think especially if we want actually to tackle illegal shipments, we need to make legal shipments easier to comply and make sure that we have the same interpretation across all member states. It's not normal, and I took here on purpose the example of paper, for which there is a quality standard, that a single shipment is going to change 3 or 4 times of status between 2 neighboring countries, while de facto from a purely administrative viewpoint, it might be easier to send it outside Europe to facilities where basically we might have similar standards or substandards applicable. And I think if we actually want to have a well-functioning internal market, we need first to tackle the situation in Europe. Now, trying to put a bit of, again, look at the main problems that we are having and also to complement what Cyrine and Mageswari have been saying. What are the main reasons for today this international trade of waste and secondary materials? And again, willing to make a distinction between, on one hand, legal shipments, illegal shipments, poorly sorted waste, and high quality materials. First, because there is a global imbalance between supply and demand. And I think that needs to be tackled one way or the other. And I will come back to that in my later slide. Massive differences between materials. We cannot compare plastics with metals, for instance. Has nothing to do in terms of properties, values, and markets, for sure. Poor enforcement. And I think as recyclers, this is a major issue. I took here a picture that I took myself going to Ghana, visiting actually Agboshishe. I know obviously before the situation there, but for sure shipping e-waste to places where there are absolutely no facilities for proper treatment is everything but the way forward. That's a must. And also, and I know that's a longer shot, but we need to go very quickly on that, trying to tackle as much as possible increasingly linear economy, which still have an edge. And I say that at the time where we are going to have a recovery plan in Europe. Massive amounts of money is going to be injected in the European economy, and we need to make sure it's going to be well spent to give an edge to circular value chains, be it for recycling or for other actually activities which are going to contribute to moving to that circular value chain, be it for design, be it for end-of-life recovery, so forth and so on. And I can tell you, I see a lot of innovation and R&D happening. What is being needed today is to have the signals to make sure that we direct those investments into those game changers, activities that we keep seeing in our business as recyclers, but in many other businesses. And just to remind that in Europe, only 12% of the materials that are being used by the European industry comes actually from recycling. So if you ask me what it takes to fix the problem, and to complement again what my colleagues from NGOs have been saying, and bring obviously an industry's perspective, design pricing externalities is absolutely crucial to correct and fix the economics. Target-oriented revision of the waste shipment regulation, and I think Gail is going to speak about that in a minute, is absolutely essential, and really making progress on what sound management of waste and especially sound recycling means globally is equally important. And here I want to make the comparison because you have a huge difference obviously between mixed plastics which are being shipped outside Europe, whereas they should be sorted out first and foremost in Europe, and also serve actually the internal market as a priority, but that also very much depends on the development of end markets, as I mentioned before. And on the other hand, acknowledging that the material, that the manufacturing capacity is absolutely global, and when, for instance, very clean PS or ABS, which actually comes from electronics, are going to be shipped even outside Europe with extremely high degrees of purities and cost per ton, which are extremely expensive. We speak about 300, 400, 500 euros per ton. Obviously, they're going to be used to manufacture new products. And I think here making the distinction between those two streams or those kind of streams, what is high quality versus what has not been sorted, is equally important. I want to stop here. I hope I was not too long, and welcome the debate at the end of the different presentations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel, for this very interesting presentation that triggered a lot of questions, actually, but we won't have time to go through all of them. The first one is, I think, a clarification around recycling stakeholders at the European level. Is the link between Uric and Plastic Recyclers Europe?
Sure. Well, PRB represents basically represent plastic recyclers. We do have a plastic recycling branch. We do have members in commons, and we do work together. And yeah, I think that's what I can say. And we also came up with common messages in relation to, for instance, to the implementation of the Basel amendments into European legislation, especially to make sure that we support high quality recycling, traceability, but also make sure that we have an internal market for plastics recycling that works efficiently. And this is, I think, a common target that we both have.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks a lot. I hope that clarifies the question. I will only have time for one question about the content of your presentation, about the fit for purpose waste shipment policy that you mentioned. Does it involve creating new harmonized shipping codes? We're talking about HS codes that reflect the use of the waste as a secondary raw material for production.
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very technical question as well. And the answer is yes. I cannot say it depends obviously of the streams, but since we're also moving and need to make distinctions between the quality and the specifications that are being used, it's also important to have HS codes which are adequately reflecting those differences, and also actually to support what I have said, which is to make sure that waste shipments intra-EU and extra-EU especially are going to support sustainability and not the other way around.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. And sorry, I don't have time to take any more questions. I will move on quickly to the fourth and last speaker, Gaël de Rotalier. Thanks a lot, Gaël, for being here. Gaël is a policy officer at the European Commission within DG Environment, and he leads the team dealing with the EU policy related to waste shipment, the Basel Convention, end-of-life bicycles, ship recycling, and waste from extractive industry. His role includes working with member states, international organizations, industry, and civil society on the implementation and enforcement of EU legislation related to waste, and especially to address, as we've discussed, illegal shipment of waste. In his early career in the European Commission, he was in charge of the EU policy on wildlife trade, where he was spearheading the EU approach against wildlife trafficking in close cooperation with enforcement agency, namely Europol and other international bodies. So thanks a lot, Gail, for being here and for representing the view of the Commission in this very timely on this very timely topic. And I will give the floor to you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for organizing this seminar, webinar. And yes, indeed, for us in the European Commission, this is a very timely moment to have a discussion on the EU policy with respect to export of waste. Because as you mentioned in the introduction of the seminar, the European Commission will be proposing changes to the current rules on the shipment of waste. This proposal should be tabled this year, later this year. So it's indeed very relevant to hear and gather additional information input on what these future rules could look like. And just to also explain a bit the process in the EU. So once the Commission tables a proposal for changing these rules, and this means it will be discussed afterwards with the government of the 27 member states of the EU and the European Parliament, so that then there can be an agreement on what these new rules would look like. So what I'm just saying that there will be quite some discussions and debates in the coming months and years on these issues at the EU level, and of course it's important that all the voices are heard in that debate, be it from the civil society or from the companies like the recycling companies that Emmanuel is representing. Okay, there have been many very interesting things being said today, and of course, with the starting of the presentation by Mageswari about what's happening in Malaysia, also showing the challenges of the difficulties, the damages created by the export of waste in Turkey, from the presentation by Cyrine. And that's very clear that this is something that should not happen, that we don't want to happen. So the question is how can the situation be improved, and what role would have the definition of the new EU rules in that respect? Just maybe zooming back a bit, this review of the waste shipment regulation very much takes part in the context of the new agenda of the European Commission, in line with the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is really to see and use all possible leverage to turn the European economy to more circular models, and that's part of a whole encompassing approach, which includes reviewing a number of legislation, also linked to specific waste streams. I mean, the European Commission just proposed new rules on batteries. There will be new proposal as well on packaging, building on the single-use plastic directive, notably, which was adopted in 2019. We will also look at the rules on end-of-life vehicles, and beyond the waste. I think we are very much looking into the sustainability of products and the design of products, and that should also be reflected in a number of other initiatives which have all been announced in the European Green Deal, notably on textile or on sustainable product policy. So I think it's important to show that when we talk about the review of the waste shipment regulation, this is part of a whole process, and that this is one of the pieces of the puzzle which could help moving towards more circular model and more sustainable ones. So now, what are we talking about? I mean, when we are talking about notably the export of waste outside the EU, we are talking about 30 million tons of waste which are exported every year from the European Union. Around half of it is exported to other countries from the OECD, while the remaining 50% is exported outside the OECD. And the most commonly exported waste are metal scrap, paper waste, plastic waste, textile waste. so we are currently, I mean, I think in the EU we have a policy and and legislations on these issues, notably on the export side, which is already quite strict. And that's based notably on the Basel Convention and the international standards. And I must say, I mean, for us, of course, when looking at this issue, we're not just looking at it just from the EU perspective. We are looking at it from an international, global one, and that means looking at the at what can be done at the global level in the first place. And that's why we are very much supportive of the efforts done by the Basel Conventions lately on plastic waste, but also on many other issues relating to waste management and shipment of waste. And that's also why, I mean, the EU has adopted not only the Basel Convention, but also the Basel Ban Amendment, which prohibits the export of hazardous waste outside the OECD, which is not the case of a number of other OECD countries. I think it's quite important that we remind that. But beyond just the Basel Convention, I think we have rules in the EU which are also quite strict in relation to what can be exported outside the EU. And that's notably why the EU is banning the export of plastic waste, which are not destined for recycling outside the OECD. And that's going beyond what the Basel Convention says and what international law requires us to do. So, but of course, that doesn't mean that things are perfect, as has been shown by the different presentations, and as we are very much aware. So now, in the review of the waste shipment regulation, which are these EU rules on shipment of waste, we are looking at how basically we could really ensure much better that the waste which are exported outside the EU and notably outside the OECD are dealt with in a sustainable manner. And again, the current rules already say that, but they are not being implemented properly in many instances. So what we would be looking at is whether first these rules should be made clearer and easier to enforce. And notably, when looking at export outside the OECD, whether we should change the current rules, which are basically relying on basically saying no export of hazardous waste, but for green listed waste, then export is possible, and then we have a dialogue with the countries of import about what their rules are. But should we change that and make it more robust to ensure that the environmental sound management of this waste is ensured? And if it's not the case, then that there should be basically maybe a prohibition of exporting unless we get the confirmation by the countries of origin, of destination, sorry, that they can deal with the waste properly. So should we go that way? I think that's one idea that we are exploring. But we have also heard that if one country like China is stopping their import, then this would lead to a rerouting waste to other countries, including in the OECD, like is the case for Turkey. And so we would, and today, of course, we have been discussing with the authorities in Turkey, as we've done with the authorities in Malaysia. There are regular contacts between the EU authorities and these countries. But when we talk about what is happening in the OECD, there is no real means to go beyond discussing and making sure that the rules are known and implemented. But if one country says, okay, I want to be able to import this waste, then in the OECD there are no means for us to go beyond what they are saying. So we would like to see how we can go. Also, we can have a means to check what is happening for export to one OECD country if we realize that this might trigger serious problems there. So these are what ideas that we would have, basically relying on what countries would be able to do and what type of information we would need to check from these countries. Now, I think what is also important and is also to look at what can be done by the export, or what should be done by the exporting companies in the EU, and whether they should also be more accountable about the export of waste outside the EU, and how the current obligation, which is already there in EU law, that they should make sure that the waste is properly managed in the country of destination, these obligations are properly implemented and turn into reality. So we are looking as well as what could be done from the side of private actors to ensure better that this obligation is implemented. And in that respect, I think we also see quite an important role for the NGOs and the civil society to also raise and flag some issues which, as has been done just this morning, would require some specific follow-up of some specific actions. I think that, I mean, so we are really looking into basically from the side of the rules, really making them sharper and more adapted to what we really want to achieve in terms of sustainable management of the waste in the third countries. And if this is not possible, then that such trade should not happen. Of course, when you look at what the rules say, that's one thing which is very important. What is also even more important is how they are enforced. And that's also why, as part of the review of the waste shipment regulation, we're also looking at how to best deal with illegal shipment of waste. And that's a lot looking at enforcement, investigations, working with the relevant EU and customs office and also third countries. So that will also be another pillar of our approach, bearing in mind that, well, this will also be a question about resources, priorities of enforcement authorities as to how much they should be dealing with this. But that would be also a big priority for the review. And finally, notably as mentioned by Emmanuel, looking at what is happening in the EU and how the shipment of waste in the EU could happen and could be facilitated when it's for high quality waste going for recycling, while ensuring, of course, that it doesn't create negative environmental impact and that it doesn't lower the protection of the environment. So that would be the third pillar, looking at intra-EU shipment of waste with that aim as an objective. I think maybe I should stop there so that we have a bit of time for Q&A, because there were many other very interesting points raised in the discussions, but I think maybe it might be good if we could move to the Q&A session so that it's not just me talking, but also reacting to what has been said. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, Gael. Before moving to the questions with all the panelists, maybe there was one question for you that was asked before during the webinar. You mentioned the reaction of the EU to the Turkey export, the discussion you've been having. But what about the reaction from the EU regarding issues with exports within the European Union? So we're talking about here import for export to Romania, for instance, to co-incineration plants. Has the EU reacted specifically to this?
Well, I think here there are 2 points. I mean, one of them is illegal. If it's illegal shipment, then the response should be better enforcement, better cooperation, and that's something that we are looking at. Bearing in mind that we in the European Commission, we are not police officers. I mean, we can promote cooperation. The one which are really responsible are the member states and the enforcement authorities. This being said, we are working as well with the EU Anti-Fraud Office to see how they could step up their efforts and look into waste trafficking in the EU also as part of their mandate and do it better. So that's on the enforcement side. Then what we are also noticing is that there are also some waste shipment from some countries in Europe to others in the EU, which are perfectly legal, but which are also creating some difficulties in some countries, notably because these countries are saying, well, we have our waste management plans. We want to improve separate collection, better sorting of waste. But when we want to get this waste treated, notably in waste for energy facilities, then this waste for energy facilities tell us, well, we are relying on the import of waste from other member states, which are of better quality and for which we get a better price, and therefore we cannot take on your own domestic waste. And that's something that we're also looking at, whether this shipment of this type of waste is really conducive to a better waste management in the country of destination.
Okay, thanks a lot for the answer. And thanks a lot for the presentation, and also want to thank all the speakers for your presentation. And I will now open up the floor for broader questions and answer to all the panelists. And so we have 25 minutes for general questions. And I will start maybe, since I'm the moderator and it's sunny and I'm in a good mood, I want to ask just a general big question around waste trades and circular economy. There has been mention around circular economy within Europe. Mageswari also mentioned the circular economy concept, but I feel like it means a lot of different things. And one key thing in circular economy, and that was, I think in the chat, is that it should happen more at the regional level, that it cannot happen at the global level. It has to happen either regionally at the European level or nationally. And so there is waste trades that we see is linked to circular economy, but if we're talking about really achieving a circular economy, how would you see waste trades as a way to achieve circular economy? What needs to be changed, what needs to be done, and what are a bit the safeguards regarding waste trade happening within a true circular economy framework? So I don't know if anyone wants to begin.
I can start if you wish, but it's there is no straightforward answer, also because you have extremely big differences depending on the material streams on which we are talking. Plastics, and again, has its own specificities. It's not the easiest material. It is recycled, it is recoverable, but obviously it creates problems that are different, or opportunities that are different than all the materials. One thing that we need to acknowledge is that in today's world, the production of facilities are located in Europe and beyond Europe. And especially if we speak about trying to foster a circular economy in Europe, it's actually one of the key objectives to me are twofold. First, to design products in a way that they are easier during the use phase, to have a longer use phase, and when they reach end of life stage, to be recovered for material recovery purposes. That's point number one. Point number two, obviously, when it comes to the use of recycled material, what is equally crucial is to make sure that the production capacity that we have in Europe and beyond is going to shift towards more use of secondary materials rather than virgin materials. And that obviously requires more than only a waste shipment policy. It also requires, and that's why I've been stressing that, to make sure that externalities are being reflected in prices, whether it's through taxation, whether it's through incentives, whether it's through, because otherwise we are always going to go towards displacing those problems. Whether it has to be more local and regional, in an ideal world, yes. But on the other hand, when you are basically working in industry, and the recycling industry is an industry, you need to build on economies of scale. So you cannot have in each and single EU member state for a given polymer, let's put it like that, or whatever material, have the facility which is going to allow basically high quality material recovery, so high quality recycling. So you need to have shipments for that purpose intra-EU and also sometimes extra-EU. And I think this is the key. What we don't want to see happening is materials that are going to be shipped within or outside Europe, which are going to be dumped and pollute and actually pollute and create the problems that both Mageswari and Cyrine have been portraying, very telling examples, versus having an economy which is truly circular locally in Europe and globally. And the last question I want to, or the last point I want to say is that we need to be a bit smart, because we do not have the same leverage in Europe and outside Europe. So that needs to be also tailored a bit. And what we as Zurich have been telling quite a lot, the European Commission, is really make sure to work both on the design aspect, which you are doing, I know, and on the other side, trying basically to level the playing field with especially primary materials. And that goes obviously beyond, to have a level playing field for circular activities. So I want to stop here because I think we could have another half an hour discussion on that one.
But I just wanted to add that I think for us in the Commission, we really see this this context of the Green Deal, of the recovery and resilience funds, and as an opportunity that should be seized by the European Union to build at the regional scale a proper circular economy models, and that encompasses a lot of more indeed things than just a waste shipment, looking from the design to the recycled content, and that I think, and also building investments which could also bring some benefit in terms of employment in the EU. So we are at this juncture where we have this opportunity, and we are trying in the EU to use the leverage that we have to facilitate that, and working, of course, with all stakeholders and the industry involved, so that it can happen. So it's not going to be something that can be put in place in a few months' time. But I mean, if we don't do it now, I think we would lose an opportunity which is quite important.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cyrine, you had your hand raised. Want to add something?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come back on this point. I think in our view, the circular economy for plastic wastes, local treatment should always be the priority. And there's a principle for this in the Basel Conventions, the principle of proximity, right? It's not an inflexible proximity principle. It means, for example, with some, let's say you have a specialty polymer, you can't build scale for that within a country or within a region, then there might be a case for a global circular economy for that material in particular, for that waste in particular. But I think there's a really important point there. And it's the point that distance is relevant. Distance has effects, and it has effects on responsibility. And we've seen that in a lot of psychology studies on torture, actually. The ability to inflict harm when the victim is miles and miles away and you cannot see what's happening is much greater than the ability to inflict harm on your family, on your neighbor, on someone in your street, on your own community. So that's one thing in terms of when recycling operations have toxic impacts, including from residuals. And the second point is the loop. So the feedback loop, where when we see that a residual is having toxic effect, or we see that a specific kind of plastic is causing toxic effects during recycling, how does that inform redesign? Well, the closer these operations are to the place where the design decisions are being made, the more likely this feedback loop will happen. And so what could one solution be if we cannot have this local treatment, if we cannot resolve these issues through proximity? For us, it's transparency about impacts, right? So if I can see that I'm sending my waste to a facility in country X, and I can click on a map, an EU map, and I can see, okay, these are the real-time emissions from that facility, and citizens in that city can click and see these are the real-time emissions from that facility that they're claiming. Let's go and check. Are these emissions? Can we ground truth these emissions? If we had this transparency about toxic emissions, real-time, available to environmental defenders, available to industry as well, because maybe there's unfair competition, right, between other operators who are doing dirty practices at lower prices, then we might be able to resolve some of the problems that are created by distance and the global market.
Thanks a lot, Cyrine, for this and for all your answers. Linked to this, there was a question on the job creation related to waste trade. Does waste trade really create jobs, and what kind of jobs? There has been, for example, a report by Gaia today on the job creation and zero waste. Yeah, how the findings reflects the waste management locally versus the waste trade approach. Yeah, basically, what are the link between jobs and waste trade, and what kind of job, also depending on where the waste is being treated. I don't know who.
I was wondering if Magues actually wanted to speak to this question from the experience of Malaysia. What jobs are created or avoided through waste trade?
Yeah, in terms of waste trade, what we are saying is like if it is clean waste that is coming in and it is going to the recyclers, legal recyclers, then it is creating jobs. Yeah, but then what we are saying is who is ensuring that it is only clean and homogeneous waste is coming in. So we need to have robust monitoring on that side. And also in terms of the waste itself, as Gaia had come up with the report today, in terms of, it's not only recycling, you have the composting part of it, repair, and also what we are also looking into is here in terms of the redesigning of packaging and delivery systems, which will create more jobs. Yeah? And so this is the part of the work that we are doing also in the movement towards zero waste, yeah, creating more jobs rather than having all this plastic waste which is low value, low grade, and ends up in incinerators where it is only like maybe employing 2 persons to in terms of the incineration companies. So this is our point of view here in the developing countries. And it has to be clean jobs. Yeah? We don't want dirty waste and then it's like affecting the workers here.
You know what I wanted to add following Mageshwari intervention is that one of the key things, especially when it comes to plastics here, is traceability. Because as you rightly mentioned, you must, and there is a distinction between polluted and contaminated exports, and obviously exports of materials which are clean and which can go straight indeed for further recycling or use in facilities. And this is also what I think would be one of the key elements, both at Basel level and actually at with the revision of the waste shipment regulation. In terms of job creation, I see in the chat that wars creates jobs. Yeah, I think what we need is sustainable jobs. What I can say is that with recycled content under the SUP directive, we saw that it created value, it created jobs, and it actually created value, and they linked for the first time the price of virgin polymers from the price of recycled polymers. And that allowed the industry, from us to the downstream users, to scale up and even go beyond actually what the Commission has set as targets was 2 or 3 years ago that was deemed to be impossible. So I think this is a lot of discussion has been about pricing and incentives, something that is extremely important for us. And I think that's really, really crucial in terms of jobs. If we put the right signals, we are going to create more jobs. So again, that goes, I know, beyond the question of simply waste shipments and trade and stuff like that. Those are absolutely vital questions, but we also need in Europe, as Gail has been saying, to move up on creating those framework conditions to retain value, and then make sure that when the products are reaching end of lives, it's much easier and economically viable to recover them, to recycle them, and put them back into products. And by doing that, we also kill 2 stones with 1 bird, because at the end of the day, when you have to put recycled materials back into products, you also obviously have to work on the design aspect.
Thanks a lot. Anyone who wants to comment? I guess not. Then I will move on to another question that is linked to what Mageshwari has been discussing, which is about a ban on possibly EU plastic waste exports. We know there is a need to solve this plastic waste issue, to have other measures, as we've been saying, but it's a bit always the question of the chicken or the egg. Are we going to improve the system because there is a ban, or are we saying we don't need a ban because the system is going to improve, but then it does not improve really because there is no restriction for exports? So one of the questions was, what are the main obstacles for an EU ban on plastic waste exports outside of the Union, and how could enforcement by national or international inspection agency could be improved to combat also illegal waste trades? And that's for Gail mainly, but I encourage other speakers to comment on this.
Yes, thank you. I mean, so on the export of plastic waste, I think yeah, has been said. I mean, from the 1st of January this year, so we have new rules on export of plastic waste, which are much stricter than before. And specifically, the way that we in the EU have implemented them means basically this is not a full ban. We have to acknowledge that, but it means if you are exporting outside the OECD, basically the only types of waste that you can, plastic waste that you can export outside the OECD are the ones defined well in Annex 9 of the Basel Convention. Basically, these are the ones which are sorted waste and which are sent for recycling. And in addition, if we have that's the current legislation in the EU. I mean, we have been asking all the countries outside the OECD, all of them, what rules they have on this type of import. And if they tell us we will not accept them, we are banning the import of such waste, even this green listed waste, then this will be put in our EU legislation in the coming weeks, months. Without that's the current situation. That's not even what we are going to be changing in the next years. But they can tell us we don't want this waste, and then this is going to be completely banned to export all type of plastic waste outside the EU to this specific country. So that's what is happening outside the OECD. And that's the current situation. And yet we will be looking as part of the review later on whether we can even go further than that. Now, if we look at it, at what is happening from the EU towards the OECD countries, the rules are less strict. And then it's a question about yes, indeed, making sure that if there is problems in these countries as well, then we have the right tools to check with these countries. And there's been quite a lot of discussion about Turkey this morning. We are, as I've said, we are in regular contact with the authorities there to exactly understand what their practices are and how sustainable it is for them to export this plastic waste. And if indeed there are some problems of illegal waste and illegal shipment, then this is where we have to move to the enforcement investigation side, which is happening as well in a number of cases. So that's the situation today. The question, I think, is whether in the future we could have even stricter rules and how they could be shaped and for what purpose. And that's the whole a discussion that we intend to have when we propose the revision of the waste shipment rules later this year.
Thanks a lot, Gail. Cyrine, you wanna?
Yeah, I just wanted to refer to a couple of challenges that make us believe that the OECD itself is not a space where we can guarantee that there won't be severe pollution and problems from plastic waste. And the reason why we think this EU ban on exports of plastic outside the Union would be valuable. So, for example, the case of Turkey you've seen in the video, there's an issue of power, right? So the Turkish authorities are in contact with the EU Commission. That's great, but the balance of power in Turkey, the groups that are documenting the impact, these are civil society groups, they're environmental defenders, and there are a lot of individuals who are scared to speak out because of the situation in the country and because a lot of the importers are big industrial interests that have privileged access to the government compared to civil society. So we're not entirely, unfortunately, we're not entirely convinced that will be sufficient. A parallel: Mexico and the United States. So Mexico is an OECD country, and for example, there is in theory some controls that Mexico should exercise even on the import of hazardous waste. But in practice, the politics between the countries mean that Mexico doesn't or rarely refuses any shipments coming from the United States. So they've been doing all the dirty work of dealing with used batteries from the United States with terrible, terrible environmental consequences. And that's why, for example, even Mexican groups are saying Mexico should ban imports of plastic waste because they won't be able to actually use prior consent because the political sovereignty isn't there. It might be there formally, but in reality, it's not there. And that's why we believe the exporting regions have a responsibility, and we believe that the EU has the possibility to exercise that leadership.
Okay. Thanks again for your answers. Yeah, just raise your hand if there's anything you want to add. We don't have a lot of time, and I'm really happy that we see that this topic is really timely and triggers a lot of debates. There is one question that starts with the fact that the participants of the webinar are mostly zero wasters, and in the chat and in the questions. And so there is a question specifically for Emmanuel and Gaël regarding the fact that if the main focus of European waste management and green policy will keep being on recycling, which should be the last resort in a circular economy and a zero waste society. Basically, this recycling should be the last resort of a zero waste society and circular economy, because it's very energy consuming, but also that's not the best purpose for material. And so the question is, what has been done so far on the EU level to promote the refuse, reduce, and reuse logic behind zero waste and circularity?
Gaël, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Well, maybe I start then, and then you can come in. I think yeah, if you also look at what the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan says, I mean, it says really waste prevention should be the priority, and recycling, well, should happen when you cannot prevent the waste from becoming a waste in the first place. But that's remain at the top of the hierarchy and what we should be promoting. Now, I mean, between saying that as a commitment and turning it into legal binding requirements, there is a way that is currently being taken through the different initiatives that we are looking at, and that's also building on what has happened in the single-use plastic directive. In that case, we were not just saying recycling is a solution, but when there are alternatives to products that could be placed on the market, then the single-use plastics in questions should be banned. And we would decline this policy in the coming months and years with a different initiative. And one of them, which I think would be pretty important for all of you to follow, is what will happen on the packaging side, where there is a directive on packaging and packaging waste, which has been there for quite some time, and it will be reviewed, and there will be a proposal to review that maybe, well, it should be later this year, where we could also translate this type of actions. There are a lot of other reflections and work, notably on the right to repair, and on the sustainable product policy, which is also which is the flagship of the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is to say, well, the way that we are designing and manufacturing products, that's a key element which should be the priority in the future, not just looking at how much recycling could be increased in the future. So there is a whole narrative and priority which is there, and which, as I said, would be progressively implemented through different initiatives. So I think it's quite clear that we are not just looking at recycling as the only solution. And I would really invite you to follow up what would come up on this different initiative in the future. Thank you.
I wanted also, because I answered in written to the question that was raised by Fatma. So I was already anticipating and trying to answer while you were asking the question. Really, I think it makes very, you cannot oppose both, actually, because on one hand, what is important is to retain value during the use phase of a product. And this, again, actually requires to work on the design to make products more repairable, more reusable. And we, as the recycling industry, never said, oh, we are against that, not to the contrary. And to be frank, you know, and the second thing is that when we are recycling complex products, the recycling industry is already quite a lot reusing certain components, whether they are found in cars or electronics. So I think that's a key element. Last but not least, we are also representing textile reuse and recyclers, private companies in Europe. And today, most of end-of-waste textiles actually go for preparation for reuse, which is very good. The point is that for the ones which are of insufficient quality to be marketed again in second-hand textiles markets, be it in Europe or outside Europe, the material recovery options are rather limited. So this is where actually innovation needs to take place. So again, that actually drives me back to what I said at the beginning. Design is really absolutely crucial, and then making sure that we have the framework conditions so that those activities which are more sustainable can compete on a level playing field. So again, you know, since recycling doesn't happen at the same phase as, for instance, repair or reuse, I don't think there is a contradiction between going for both. What we as recyclers want to make sure is that what is being placed today on the market contains recycled material to have more actually decoupling between the resource use and actually the production, and make sure that we are going to take advantage of those CO2 and energy benefits that recycling brings. And point number two, that the design is is well done to make sure that during the use phase and end of life phase of the products, we are going to end up with more sustainable products. So that was also what I tried to answer to Fatma online, because I don't see there is a strong opposition between those two actually objectives, the one that you are supporting and the one that we as recycling industry support.
Okay, thanks a lot. And so, yeah, I guess the answer is to go for a Zero Waste Europe. This is the end of the webinar. I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank the panelists for their excellent contribution, and also thanks for bearing with me, because this topic would require maybe a day or even days of discussions, and so we try to condense a bit everything in an hour and a half. So thanks for bearing with me and for managing also through these difficult times. A few reminders. The presentation from the speakers will be available on the Zero Waste Cities website under the Academy sections. You can also sign up for our next live webinar, and the title is Recycling Enough? And finally, to get all the information about the upcoming webinars, you can see Emmanuel smiling about the name of the next webinar. But if you want more information, you can also register to the city newsletter for the upcoming webinars, but also other information around Zero Waste Cities. So thanks a lot, everyone, and I wish you an excellent day.